The Nordic Arctic Både baby Bukkøyde. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session at the Arctic Frontiers 2026. It's a pleasure to see so many people here in this event called Indigenous Engagement and Co-Creation in Arctic Research, hosted by Nordforsk and UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. My name is Torjor Olsen. I will be moderating this session. I'm the head of department at the Center for Sami Studies at UiT and a professor of Indigenous Studies. It's a pleasure to have my panelists ready to take their place here at the floor. We have an interesting session ahead of us. We will have a short the short introduction by me first, and then we will have an introduction by our panelists and a conversation between the three first of them. Moving on, we have some presentations, short presentations shared on the screen, and then we will have a second panel after that. This topic of indigenous engagement and co-creation in the Arctic is a concept of growing interest. Indigenous engagement or indigenous involvement are concepts that are talked of increasingly, especially on the Sami side these days. We have seen how this concept has also been used on the other side of the Atlantic for quite some time, and now it's getting here as well. We see how funders of research have started using these concepts actively in their calls. And I think it's fair to say that as a sector, the university sector is now trying to figure out, especially on the Nordic side, how do we deal with this? How do we answer to these calls for indigenous engagement, indigenous involvement? What does it mean? How do we do that? Especially for natural scientists and natural science institutions, it can be a challenge to figure out how do we answer to this. But we see that these concepts or virtues even of involvement, engagement, and co-creations are potentially powerful virtues or ideals or practices that now seem to either have found their way into or are in the process of finding their way into mainstream research. Within indigenous research, they have been used for quite some time already. But as I said, it is an ongoing process. The region that we're in and the region of the Arctic that this conference is located in and deals with is a very complex region, as you know. On one hand, it's a testing ground for how societies, ecosystem, and species even can adapt or fail in this phase of rapid transformation. We know that climate change creates challenges. We know that, especially seen here in Tromsø over the last few years, how tourism and potentially over-tourism is a new challenge. And we see how both municipalities, public management authorities, and also researchers are now trying to figure out how to answer to this. We see in our Nordic region, both on the Sami side and also on the other side of the Atlantic, both in Klalit Nunaat, Greenland, and over on the American side, how these matters of not only co-creation, but more importantly, living together is something that we need to continuously speak of, talk of, because of the conflicts that have aroused, that continue to come to the surface. And we need to figure out, both as a community, most importantly, but also within our different fields of how do we answer to this? How do we find ways of moving ahead? And in that sense, collaboration, international, cross-cultural cooperation in the Arctic is something that we and now I speak as a member of the academia, that we as an academic institution and community, we need to figure out how we can write about this, research on, with, for all the communities in the North. And in this sense, we need to ensure that we move from speaking about this and to ensure that these concepts that we use and the virtues that we use do not remain empty concepts, that they're filled with something proper. And then part of this is the recognition of indigenous knowledge, which is part of the discussion today. So now I'd like to introduce to the floor Sara Olsvig, Gunde Dretter, and Hanna-Marit Otekoski. Please. So, thank you so much for being here, for traveling here to Tromsø. None of you live in Tromsø, so I'm happy that you have come here to the city that also that I live and to the city of the Arctic Frontiers. We will have a conversation, but first off, you will introduce yourself way better than I can do. So please introduce yourself with who you are, where you work, and where you come from. And you can choose for yourself what is most important to bring into this introduction. And say a bit about the work that you do and what you bring into this discussion. Hanna, would you like to start, please?
Hallå? Joo, mun ammalla nillesas andaras asla niija hannamaret. That is my Sami name, and that is one of the most important things for me to bring into the discussion when I am introducing myself. It might be that not so many people here will feel any connection to that name, but it might be that there is somebody here who knows where that name comes from. I am a professor in Sami language and Sami language didactics at the Sami University of Applied Linguistics in Kautokeino.
Thank you so much for welcoming us in Sápmi. It's an honor for me to be here yet again. My name is Sara Olsvig. And I thought about, do I have any names in our Galashisut language? But I don't, but I have Aya, most important, auntie, and Angayu, big sister, Nuka, little sister, Banik, daughter, so forth. But I'm the chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. We represent Inuit in Galashitinat, Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Chukotka, Russia. We currently chair our council in Galashitinat, Greenland for a 4-year term ending this summer. So I'm very honored to be back in Sápmi, also towards the end of my term as chair. I also do research. I'm an affiliated researcher at Ilisimatusarfik, and I have a PhD in Arctic studies.
Kiitos, både bjeive, det både idet, mullan Dutamark lem birkt, nej Dutamarkt lem, ja Anna Per Anna Birkt Gunbritt. Gunbritt Retter, I'm head of the Arctic and Environmental Unit of the Sami Council, a position I've had for 20 years. In October last year, I turned 20 years in this position. And I'm a coastal Sami from northeast Norway in a village called Onjarg. And I've engaged in this topic throughout the career in the Sami Council, but also in the 4 years before that when I was technical advisor in the Arctic Council Indigenous Peoples Secretariat. So we have gone many rounds with co-production, co-creation, and engagement of Indigenous knowledge holders and Indigenous knowledge systems in Arctic science. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as you can tell, we have a knowledgeable panel here. And this first part has a fairly simple question raised. How can Indigenous and scientific knowledge systems work together to reframe conflict over species, land, and resources? Easy as nothing, don't you think? I think I will need to divide it into bits and pieces first and to look into parts of this. And I think, again, Hanna, you've been working as a Sami researcher in the field of Sami research, and also across the state borders, Finland, Sweden, and Norway for many years. And I was wondering about, do you see this working together aspect of research in action? How do you combine scholarly methods and bonds with Sami knowledges in your work? And tell us a bit about your work also.
Yes, thank you. Hello? Yes. Yeah, thank you very much for the timely question. I think that these questions are very important at the moment, but they have actually existed for a long, long time already. It's nothing new for the Sami researchers who've been working with these questions. And the very simple answer would be that, yes, collaborations and working together is possible. But I think that there are, I maybe need to explain some of my why I would say it's possible, but I'm not saying that it's always happening. I also want to say that Sami and indigenous research and these questions about indigenous knowledge, they should not be just separated from academic knowledge and research and put aside. I think that we are seeing already that this kind of research is now becoming mainstream. We're not saying that we have to separate mainstream and indigenous research. I think that they are now working together. And I am myself active in one of Nordforsk research, or it is a network project called MAST, Making Knowledge for Sustainable Transformations. And I'm a linguist, and I come from a very, still very positivist tradition. Linguists are not very known to be very careful with the data always, where they get it from. They don't always know what the language behind the data that they are looking at comes from, what the contexts are, and what kind of values and knowledge the language brings with it. So I think that there are now very nice projects that I've seen and lots of collaborations where knowledge has been shared. But there are also still some, quite many actually, disciplines where perhaps this kind of knowledge has not been recognized or is not accepted. And from the linguist point of view, I am seeing that we are now moving towards kind of a decolonization of linguistics. And if we are not kind of tossing away all the methods that we have, we are not kind of changing the methodologies of linguistics, but we are becoming aware of what is behind the language, what are the people behind the language and the context behind that language. And that is very important. And in the MAS project that we are in at the moment, I as a linguist get to see how artists and knowledge holders, researchers from design field and from arts, how they are sharing their knowledges, and when they don't always share the language. And this is very important that we have these kind of collaborations, and I think that it's possible, completely possible.
Yeah. Can I just follow up on one thing? You see some sort of change. You see the potential decolonization of linguistics, and you see how collaboration is growing. What would you say would be the main agents of change? Is it possible to recognize some agents of change, creating or enabling change?
In linguistics, I've seen that there are researchers who are interested in these, in the ethical sides and in the indigenous research principles. And of course, now the research is not only done by people from outside who come and get the language from us, but we are now also part of that research. So I think that change is coming from many different places, but also from within the communities.
Yeah, thank you. And remaining within Sápmi a bit longer. Gun-Britt, you have been working not as a scholar in this, but working in this field of politics and international engagement for a long time. And I was wondering, from your perspective and from your experience, do you see that there's a change? Do you see that indigenous and scholarly knowledge systems work together with people, communities, Sami Council?
Thank you. I introduced myself being 20 years in this position, saying that it's not development would be to say I have failed for 20 years. So you won't hear that it's nothing happening. You won't hear that from me. But I would like to say there are at least 3 empty chairs up front here if some people who are standing there behind or sitting on the floor would like to take those. So there's one. Yeah. So I would like to, and there's one more. Oh, there's a third one. Yeah. So there was the oldest ones from behind who took that. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you for organizing this. I almost wanted to start with, since you said in the introductory that it's a growing attention on this from the academia, so I was inspired to say, so what took you so long? The Sami people met first time in 1917 to discuss their common concerns. And not that I was around then, but I'm pretty sure the Knowledge Foundation for Decision Making was part of what was questioning when they felt that decisions taken were not in favor of Sami traditional land use. And the Arctic indigenous peoples, they met first time in 1973 in Copenhagen and addressed the same issues, that the decision that is taken on our lands is not in our favor, and that's becoming a problem. So I assume they also recognized that the knowledge that these decisions was made upon was not very accurate, because the lived experience on the land was different than what the policies developing were saying. So why I'm saying this, and I think what is fair to say, we like to say that science is objective and it is independent. But as you all know, in science diplomacy, I might say, is that the funding comes from somewhere. And it's the politicians who decide on research programs and science programs. And what they prioritize is, of course, what they think will build their societies. So science is used to build the societies that the majority politicians want to see. And when it comes to the High North policies, I think that is also that science informs the decisions, and the decisions are made at the local level or national level, and still today are not fully in line with our needs. And indigenous knowledge systems then. When you are on the land with your reindeer herd, or if you are on the fjord with your fishing vessel, you make decisions all the time. So are these decisions built on the existing science? Probably mostly not. But they still make decisions. So I think it's important to recognize that it's the indigenous knowledge system, that the experience you have built over millennia, over generations, and experience that you have, and the beliefs and the values in behind, and the knowledge that you have from that location informs your decisions. And it's about time that this decision, or this knowledge system, is also informing the decisions that are taken on our lands and waters, together with the science, which is also important to understand the changes, to understand the needs of the people, and to understand, to make the best decisions, full stop.
Yeah, thank you. And I will just make a note now to Rune and Jørgen, who will be paneling later on, representing the university and the Research Council. You should think of answering the question of what took you so long. Just in making a note about that. So now the audience also can be prepared to hear that answer. And then moving the conversation now into the wider Nordic indigenous context. Sara, a bit of the same question as to Gunn-Britt. How do you see, in your context, how do you see these issues play out?
Well, first I want to start with a little bit of a personal history or a story from my childhood. So we hunt reindeer in Galatlit Nunad, and I grew up in the west coast of Galatlit Nunad, an area with wonderful reindeer, Duttu as we call them. And in the early 1990s, I finally was old enough to go reindeer hunting. Almost not old enough, but I did it anyway. Or my parents allowed me to. That's a secret. You have to be 12. I think I was just about, very close to being 12. I was, of course, very thrilled finally to be old enough to go reindeer hunting with my father. Those years, there was a big debate in Galatlit Nunad about the reindeer population. And on one side, we had the early years of establishing Galatlit Nunad's own Institute for Natural Resources, and we had hunters who were saying there are so many reindeer, they are going to get sick if we don't hunt them. But the scientists were saying, no, there's a problem with the population of reindeer. And just as I had gotten old enough to go reindeer hunting in the years after, the restrictions became very tight. They were really tight restrictions on reindeer hunting in the mid 1990s and in those years. And then in Sisimiut, where I live, and it's not because I want to talk about the Americans, but here's a note about the Americans. You can see a big mountain called Qaqqadoqaq, which was the dew line installation Die 1. Dew line was the distant early warning system across North America, including Galatlit Nunad. And they left it right around that time. And we were watching as kids how some of the equipment was being burned, so we could see the smoke coming up from Qaqqadoqaq when the Americans left this dew line station, Die 1. And the destination became a very popular destination for us who wanted to go hiking or biking or just, be on the land, but walk on a very broad, well-established road, dirt road, that took you from the shore all the way up to the old American dew line Die 1 station. And we went there, my parents and I, wanting to just go up and see what's actually there. And this was the years of this big discussion where hunters were saying there are too many reindeer, and the biologists were saying there are very few reindeer and you cannot hunt them. So the regulation was, of course, following the biologists' advice. And we came to the road, and it was full of reindeer tracks. Everywhere you could see them very much more clearly because of the road having been established. Wonderful broad road, by the way. They were very good at establishing roads around Greenland. So we hiked up to the old station, full of reindeer tracks everywhere, like thousands. It must have been so many reindeers. In between all the leftovers from the Die 1 station, all the equipment and machines that were just left from day to day halfway down the lake or whatever, was there, had just been left. So that, of course, to me, incited an indignation. Why can we not about the Americans at that time, but about the gap between the knowledge of the hunters and the knowledge of the researchers. And sure enough, some years later, there was a problem with the population. They did get sick. There was not the regulation had been too strict so that we could not regulate the population by hunting them. And this really stuck to my head from a very, very early stage in my life, and really demonstrated to me that we need to fix this. And there's a huge, huge gap in terms of, as Gunbrit was just saying, decisions taken based on a certain kind of knowledge, which for some reason continues. Yes, there's been improvements, but continues to be blind to other kinds of knowledge, which really, in our case, in our own homelands, have also created regulation that have not been responsive to our own worldviews, to our own knowledge, to our own way of managing resources. And that, of course, to me also has connotations to colonization. And I think that there's no doubt that we have a big task ahead of us in the Nordic states, especially, the Nordic countries especially, because we have been a little bit behind in terms of understanding that our knowledge systems are different and that they are necessary, all of them. Somebody mentioned across the Atlantic, yes, Inuit live in Canada, Alaska, and Chukotka, and in Canada, Alaska, there's a different history behind research institutions and engagement and utilization of indigenous knowledge. And it's been a huge puzzle for me to see and experience how difficult that has been for us to implement it in the Nordic context. We see the Nordic states as, and they are human rights champions in so many ways. We go to the UN meetings and we sit with the Nordic states and listen to the very strong statements year by year. But when it comes to implementing, for example, our rights in terms of our knowledge within the Nordic states, there's a big, big challenge. And so to us from the Inuit Circumpolar Council, it was important to develop what is called the Circumpolar Inuit Protocols for ethical and equitable engagement. And I invite those of you who haven't heard about the document to look it up. It was published in 2022. But also to try and engage more directly with research communities and the big research institutions to ensure that we have a movement that can create rings in the water, so to speak, because we are also limited in capacity, and we can't be everywhere all the time to remind everyone. So this is also something about changing your mindset as researchers and research institutions, and really understanding that it is creating not just practical problems, it is also creating a human rights issue if research and research institutions are not the ones to take this responsibility as a very serious responsibility.
Yeah. Thank you. I see Hanna and Gunn-Britt, you are both nodding. Would you like to comment on what Sara says? Gunn-Britt first and then Hanna.
Yes, thank you. On the Nordic context, I'm glad you brought that up in comparison with the North or in America. I noted 3 words here when you mentioned Nordic context, and is what I feel, and I've heard this oftentimes in Norwegian setting, that Sami researchers can't research Sami issues because they are biased. And isn't that an awkward statement? I mean, you are maybe many of you scientists, and you should be intelligent enough to figure that. Wouldn't that same case be for Norwegian scientists researching Norwegian societal issues?
No.
Yeah.
No.
So Norwegians have to research the Swedish issues and so on. Yeah. And so I feel based on that there is still a lack of trust and in the Nordic context that I am familiar with, and which is expressed in this, that Sami scientists or researchers are biased. And also, the other note I made was the importance of strengthening the institutions, because, as I said, there is and you also said, Torgeir, in the introductory, there is a growing interest. But when we look at the Arctic strategies, for example, in the Nordic countries, a lot of, and I'm not complaining that Arctic University of Norway, Tromsø, and other campuses and other institutions, Polar, what do you call it? The institution, Polar Research, get a lot of, there's a focus on knowledge building and production. But every time a North Norwegian Arctic institution get the funding, the gap to the Sami institutions are growing, because there is not the same attention to Sami institution or knowledge institutions receiving the same attention and same support. I'm not saying we should have less funding going to polar research, but the Sami research institutions should be lifted equally. And I plead to the scientists or the institutions to raise that voice for us also to the decision makers. And not only your own. I promote science all the time. You should promote indigenous knowledge and Sami institutions all the time.
Thank you. Hanna?
Yes, I also noted what you said, that it's so difficult between countries and so on. And I can say that it's also in the Sami context. We see very big differences how things are going in Norway compared to, for example, Sweden. So that, I have worked with Sami studies and research in Sweden for 25 years, and I always felt like I was just allowed to be at the university. I was never there to actually bring in any kind of valuable knowledge, but I was there to do some work for my own people, to teach them my language, and then keep away from everything else that was the Swedish knowledge system. That has changed a little bit, but it's still, there is a big gap between the Nordic countries. They are different, so it's not just how things are in the States, Canada, and Denmark, how these can be different. But even the Nordic countries, when it comes to Sami research, indigenous research, the perspectives can be very different.
Thank you.
I forgot to say this is a Nordforsk event. We have been working with Nordforsk and received support from there, and we're very happy about that, to say that for the record.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, and also let that lead into a new question, because I think the Nordforsk has made a few calls over the last few years highlighting indigenous involvement, which has been fairly innovative. You could argue that it took some time, but it's still fairly innovative now that it's happened. And we also see that the Research Council of Norway has also starting to integrate this into calls. And it creates opportunities, of course, but also some challenges. Because I'm not sure, I guess that you, as I, had the experience of the months leading up to the deadline for the Nordforsk call that demanded Indigenous involvement, that we received these emails and these calls of, "Hi, I am a scholar representing set in name of institution. There's something on Indigenous involvement here. Can you be the one being involved?" You're nodding, Sara.
Exactly. That also happened to our inboxes in Galatlit Nunat, both at the university and ICC. And I think, I think we really have to praise Nordforsk for making the change, but it has revealed that an additional issue related to this is exactly that many researchers and institutions apparently do not think that we as Indigenous peoples or researchers should be involved at the early stages of designing a research or even discussing and be part of the decision making around what research question should we ask or should we pose. And therefore, that's a very important part of our protocols, as well as also the work we are doing in the Arctic Council to push for improvement of the utilization of Indigenous knowledge, not just the utilization, but also having a process that from the very start of a thought, of an idea, Indigenous peoples being at the table, taking part in designing the research project, taking part in formulating the research question, and better yet, maybe supporting Indigenous ideas to research and ensuring that there's a capacity to go through with research projects that were initiated by Indigenous peoples ourselves. That is a really, really big issue. And we had exactly the same situation, like 5-10 invitations last minute. Can you be the Indigenous person? Tick. No, that's not a human rights approach. So Nordforsk also has a job to do in improving that, and I know that there's work on the way to do that, but especially the research institutions in educating students. I think already there needs to be an approach that really builds on a human rights approach to all of this, because that's what it comes down to. And I think that if we don't succeed on that part, we will just continue to have a gap in between the sort of understanding of the importance. And I really think that those who have many students and also especially those who have non-Indigenous students at their institutions really have a task to do to take that responsibility on them.
Yeah, and talking about protocols, I know that the Sami Council has established some protocols for such engagement.
Yes, and I also was going to say the same. We have some criteria on the date. It is interesting how people read the calls, because it seems that some of them discover the need for Indigenous involvement the day before the deadline, and that is quite amazing that you haven't read through the whole text before you started writing the application. So we have our secret criteria on where the cutting point goes, like on when you are involved in a project and when we just figure and make a list of who are not serious about Indigenous engagement. Yeah, Sami Council has recently, I don't know if you refer to the Njolla guidance document, but that is one example I thought which was published just before Christmas. It's a guidance document on how we think science and Indigenous peoples should work together. And we developed this together with Sami Council and Ikarvik, the youth network there in northern Canada, and RIFS, which is a research, it's a Germany, and it was supported by the German Ministry of Environment. RIFS, what's that again? It's research. I saw some Germans behind there, but it's on sustainability research center. So this is meant to be a guidance on how indigenous peoples and scientists should engage with indigenous peoples. It even have some suggestions on guiding questions on how to approach a community and so on. So it's a little bit different than the ICC protocols, but it's more of a guidance document on collaboration between indigenous peoples and scientists. And also how to consider when indigenous partners should be involved or not. And it's most often, if you are doing some science on anything about land or resources in the Arctic, it's likely to impact indigenous peoples as well. And you should reach out and let us decide if we want to join or not. But there are also other like protocols and guidelines on how to engage with researchers that we have, like not internal documents, but also data management. And that's maybe an idea for the next session. It's on indigenous data management, because that is a difference between science and indigenous knowledge, that some of our data or information might be something we don't want to share, and the research and science is supposed to be open source. So there's also some respect to be developed between how we want data to be used or not used.
Yeah. And Hanna, I guess you at some University of Applied Sciences, you had the same experience.
Yes, we do. But I think that it's also important to think that Sami institutions and Sami researchers, we can also collaborate with each other. We don't always have to collaborate with non-indigenous researchers, so that it's also important that there are calls and that there are protocols even for us, so that we can continue developing our own research, because that's also needed for our own purposes. Like we heard, that we have knowledge systems that we need to safeguard, that we need to develop for our own purposes, and those need maybe different kind of approaches than the ones that are regulated by the big financiers.
And I think, to move towards the end of this particular topic, but I think the fact that we saw what happened from the Nordforsk call, and we see these new demands and new questions coming, and I think the whole spectre is seen from those last minutes, please be the token indigenous on this project, to those actually asking a serious question, bringing up early on. So we have the whole spectrum of different approaches to this. So my question for you here would be, which advice can we give to funders and to main institutions and to the scholars in the room of how to address it further? I mean, one thing is the established institution, the established scholars, but then also the coming generation of scholars. How we would try to give them an advice, if you can. Gunn-Britt first.
Yeah, I had another line of thought, which I of course now forgot, but the advice is in that, I didn't bring a slide or anything with that, but all that advice is in that document I was trying to refer to from a long internet page here, but it is about how to make better collaborations with indigenous peoples, and I would advise you to look that up. You can reach out to me afterwards in the corridor. I have about 2 minutes before I have to run for lunch, but you will see me around for 3 days at least. And so let me think of the other good thought I had while the others speaking. Yeah.
Sara, do you have some advice for?
Yes, for the funders particularly, I think, again, the funders share a big proportion of the responsibility. And we also see that inequity in access to funding, many times, of course, based on the differences in capacity. And this is really where we come back to the whole issue of equity in between, inequality in between peoples. Understanding that we as indigenous peoples are equal to all other peoples. Our knowledge system must be respected in their own rights, and they're most probably very different. We are very different as indigenous peoples. We're not just one big homogeneous group. So understanding those basic principles of a human rights approach, understanding the diversities, understanding also that there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, because it's mostly about changing your mindset as the one who has the power with the money, or institutionally in regards to knowledge production, really understanding the core principles behind why it is important to have Indigenous peoples co-lead or lead or be fully engaged and involved. And we have a right of full and effective participation in all matters that regard us. So these things are really about changing your mindset to understanding the core principles around Indigenous peoples' participation. And then also knowing that there's a difference between Indigenous people's participation and Indigenous-led. So also keeping an open eye and understanding the necessity of also funding Indigenous-led research projects. I think that we will probably have a difficulty in fully getting rid of the tokenist participation for a while, unfortunately. But if we can also, in collaboration and equal partnerships, demonstrate what Indigenous people's knowledge brings to the table. I've also heard many times the question, but what is Indigenous knowledge and what does it bring to the table? Well, that will also be context related. But one thing is for sure, it enriches the world with knowledge from a knowledge system that is not covered in the way that we generally produce knowledge in the Western world right now. So this is really important, and it's not just for us as Indigenous peoples, it's for the whole of humanity. And there I think that the bias of Western scientific knowledge is, you touched upon it in the beginning, is something that is really difficult for many of us who work within academia to face. But it is there, and it has to be addressed.
Yeah. Thank you. Hanna?
Well, yes, I have a very concrete, maybe, I don't know if it's an advice, but I was involved in 3 applications for the Norwegian Research Council last year. And in all of the applications, we got quite good grades for everything else. But then in all of them, these were arts and humanities projects. All of them said that we don't really see what the societal impact of this project is. And maybe we were not very good at explaining what the societal impact was within our own society. But I think that the problem was that our projects were not seen as being impactful for the Norwegian society. And perhaps we as Sami researchers need to think of every time how to bring in impact in the Norwegian society. But when do the Norwegian research projects take in the impact on the Sami society that is positive? When are they going to be assessed with that kind of criteria? So these are, of course, very important questions for us researchers who are writing the applications, because we do see the impact and importance of the projects, but they might be only important for 3,000 children who are the ones who are studying Sami language in Norway. And 3,000 is maybe too little seen from the Norwegian point of view, and then the impact factor is, of course, low.
I never remember what.
No, okay, yeah, please.
Sorry, and again, this flows very well to continuation to what Hanna was saying, which is actually describing what I tried to convey in the first message, that science builds societies, and exactly that is the challenge, that which society is it supposed to build. But my point, which I forgot earlier, was that it's very good that Nordforsk has made that indigenous criteria that it has to support. I don't recall exactly how it's said, but what we did address Sami Council to some Interreg applications or programs earlier is that one is to include the indigenous perspectives or people's views or needs in the call. But then the reviewers of the applications, they have no knowledge of indigenous people. So they are reviewed, and a lot of science institutions do a great job in involving indigenous peoples, but the reviewer don't understand why this time was spent on the land and why time is needed to spend on the land with the indigenous peoples or in the societies to cover those needs that they have. So we have to not only, so it's a success that we have got that call where they called for indigenous engagement. But then what about the rest of this system of science funding? We also need to influence those steps.
Thank you. And Sarah.
Since you mentioned review, that's also a point in our equitable and ethical engagement protocols that indigenous knowledge systems come with their own review as well. And very often we see that exactly also in just scientific article writing and review processes, peer review processes, that there's really no system currently that fills that gap and makes sure that those researchers who have then utilized indigenous knowledge, that the peer review process also reflects that. And that's a very, very big challenge. But even I wrote an article at some point about for the Nordic Journal of International Law, together with another researcher, on the Nordics and implementation of the rights of indigenous peoples. And we received 2 very, very different peer reviews, where one of them simply took the point of departure that this was not relevant. So, there's also within many different fields of academia, the whole question again of the bias, and also the question of, knowledge equals power in many ways, but who has then directed, the knowledge production and decided upon the knowledge production that already exists, which is then reproduced through the systems we have within academia. So I think this is a very important discussion to also have specifically on peer review.
Yeah, thank you. We are now reaching towards the end of this first part of the conversation, and I would like to say thank you for now to the 3. We will have some short presentations on the screen, and then we will open the floor for some questions from the audience to these 3. So please just, if we, the 4 of us, could just step a bit aside so they were able to see the screen. Out of the center for a second, and then we will. So for those who have some questions for these 3, please prepare them. So these presentations that we will now have, they come from 3 different people. They come from Sofia Ribeiro, who asked, how can we create models of co-research and co-governance that are both sustainable and just? From Papila Minna, who asked, how can we ensure that collaborations lead to knowledge sharing and mutual benefits instead of knowledge mining and extraction? And what are the roles of the different stakeholders in such a knowledge exchange? And finally, by Görel Heggelund, who asks, whose knowledge counts when deciding the future of the Arctic? And let us just pray that everything works.
The Nordic Arctic National Parks safeguard biodiversity and support indigenous livelihoods. But the conditions in the parks are changing. The region is warming faster than the global average, and the visitor numbers are surging. The Alamat project brings together ecology, social science, and law to study this nexus. We co-create practical solutions with, for example, Sami rights holders and park authorities in Norway, Finland, and Sweden.
Alamat looks at how current climate trends affect national parks and wilderness areas within these northern regions. And with engagement from Sami communities and local actors, we can examine how climate change, in combination with over-tourism, affects wildlife, land use, and culture. From this, we can assess how current law and policies address these realities and deliver actionable recommendations.
Indigenous knowledge reveals a deep, long-term perspective on environmental change, one that science alone is not able to fully reveal. It helps to make national park governance more sustainable, and this approach helps to protect biodiversity, sustain indigenous livelihoods, and make tourism more climate-wise and just.
SITE is a new project that is focused on marine toxins in the Arctic. And as the ocean warms and circulation patterns are changing, harmful algal toxins are starting to appear in regions where they were not present before, or they were rare. And these toxins that are produced by phytoplankton They accumulate in seafood and can pose a real risk for ecosystems, marine resources, and also the health of coastal communities.
From the start, the project was co-designed and is also co-led with our partners and communities from Nunavik and Nunatsiavut. So it incorporates their perspectives, but also their priorities and concerns at every step of the program. And our ultimate goal is to set up monitoring programs that will be efficient at detecting potential toxic events. And that can be locally carried out for many years to come. So it's a very long-term objective. Since the project started, we have been also contacted by other communities who also wanted to join the project and the network. So it's a true exchange in the sense that local knowledge holders can guide us in terms of what species, what tissues, seasons, and locations to target, so we can find then the right balance between regional and local relevance. And so we hope to contribute to establish early warning systems and capacity building in the communities.
Inuit perspectives and Inuit knowledge bring so much richness to Arctic research. You can't do Arctic research correctly without involving the people who have been here for millennia. By having Inuit lead this work and be involved in this work, you allow observations, perspectives, and voices that are not necessarily heard in most Arctic research to be at the forefront.
New methods and insights within the mining industry are needed as extractive practices are no longer sustainable. Additionally, the industry must meet the particularities of the Arctic conditions as well as the needs and wishes of its inhabitants. We introduce mining closure as a way of including Indigenous communities. Although closure gives an impression of ending, it is an ongoing plan and commitment that can be used in the early stages of mining operations and bind local communities to the mining activities throughout and beyond the life of the mine. While mining operators, political institutions, and communities do not stay the same, mining closure needs to be revisited and updated throughout the entire process. Closure, then, is an ongoing site of collaboration across differences. Ideally, it's a formalized mandate and an opportunity to co-create new landscapes according to demands and wishes of local people. So how do we put this into practice? We use ethnographic fieldwork to study how engagement and knowledge of local people can be promoted. We employ photo voice, a method known for its attentiveness towards marginalized communities through the combination of photography, critical dialogue, and experiential knowledge. Moreover, we use objects collected across different fields and use them as prompts for discussions. The collected images and objects will form the basis of a pop-up exhibition aimed at bringing attention to this perspective of the communities. The experience from the field, photo voice, and exhibitions will also be included in a set of best practices guidelines for mining closure in the Arctic. By centering the voices of those most affected, we can transform mining closure from an afterthought into a foundation for sustainable, respectful Arctic development.
These, I forgot to say, sorry, that these short films are examples of projects funded by Nordforsk on ongoing projects that are now running, and which here also show how co-creation can be put into action. So Hanna, Sara, and Gunn-Britt, please return and let us open the floor for a few questions from the audience. Oh, we see some hands already. Let's see. Yes, please.
I just like to comment that this is something that I, as a linguist, as somebody who is actually researching voice, I look at these kind of presentations, and what I don't see there are the expectations and the voices of those communities that are presented as partners. So I would very much like to ask that if you are making these kind of presentations and videos, please do also include those people and their expectations and what they would like to see from the project. What are their ideas about the project? Because this is very very common that it is only the leaders, the researchers who are talking about their project and their research questions, and they say that the indigenous people are there to lead, to teach them, to show them things, but there might be the other perspective that needs to be included too.
Thank you. And we have a question, and please, for the questions, try to keep them short and present yourself also.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Maria-Helena Sivonen, and I work as a senior researcher at the Finnish Environment Institute and as a visiting researcher at the Arctic Center. But on top of that, I'm also a newly elected member of the Sami Climate Council in Finland, which is a brand new body to combine traditional knowledge and research in Finland. And my question to you, thank you very much, by the way, for this very sober panel. It's been fantastic to listen to you. What advice or tips would you have for me to bring back to Finland, to the Council, and what we could do to improve this work that we're doing? It's been only for about 2 years in operation so far. And of course, I've taken notes for my own research from what you've done here, because this is absolutely one of the most important things that I try to convey to my work as well. And also, do you have any examples of how in your countries you could improve this with similar bodies like the Sami Climate Council? Thank you. Kiitos.
Gun-Britt, will you start?
Thank you, and congratulations on the appointment, but also to Finland for actually establishing such a body where there is, I take it as a solid recognition of the value of indigenous knowledge. My straightforward advice for you to go in there is to be bold in defining your own agenda based on what the knowledge holders and the Sami see from the land and their needs. Be proactive and not only reactive to the Finland's agenda.
Yeah, thank you. And Sara?
Yes, and I think in addition to that, I'll bring a message that also came up in a delegates meeting from Inuit Circumpolar Council Greenland, and that is that when we talk about climate change, let's take the holistic approach to the impacts of climate change to our communities. We very often see many reports about, declining sea ice and what does that mean to the hunters, or, melting permafrost, what does that mean to the infrastructure? But what does it mean to the child? What does it mean to the mother? What does it mean to the grandparents? And those things, I think, we have, at least in Galatlit Nunat, yet to really dig into the understanding of the consequences of climate change to our communities, seen in a holistic perspective. And that's really something that I'm very concerned about, because I also saw a very important report, I think it was from the Sami Council, about climate change and mental health, for example. So think, on other tracks than what we usually see in sort of the mainstream approach to climate change.
Thank you. Hanna?
Yes, and I would say that gathering the stories, the experiences of people is very important at this point, because that will also give a picture of what is happening in the society and with the people that is connected to climate change. And stories are also very important for the indigenous people to also then carry on to the next generation.
Thank you. And there was a question there as well.
Yeah, I'm Keith. I'm the director of the Arctic Center at the university, and I was really glad to hear your comment about reviewers. And I was thinking, how would you propose to Nordforsk to be a good partner, an ethical partner, given the fact that a lot of the calls don't actually have an indigenous component added to it, but then there's the possibility that that research will pop up in those calls, but then there's not reviewers who understand indigenous perspectives. So given the fact that Nordforsk has actually a really interesting opportunity to be an organization that can then influence the greater Nordic perspective in terms of research, what would you tell Nordforsk to do when it comes to all those calls? Because they're about sustainability, they're about development, they're about innovation, and I just see that part missing.
Thank you. Well, should we turn it up? Well, Sara, you can start.
Okay. Yes, it's difficult to come with proposals that also doesn't produce a lot of work for indigenous researchers. So yeah, there's a capacity issue, and I think that's just the way it is. And I mean, many of us often decline review, to be reviewers, unfortunately, because of time restraints. And I think many of us also often do many things at the same time as Indigenous researchers, have many roles in the societies we're from. But again, therefore, I think it's important to think of this as something that needs to be institutionalized, to have an approach that fundamentally within the institution is based on a set of principles and values that builds on what Indigenous peoples already built. Read what we write in terms of our protocols. Look at what would be your obligations under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. What do we already have there of knowledge from the different mechanisms that produce human rights-based approaches to different reports? There's just come out a new report from the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples to the right to data, for example. What does that report, give you in terms of some of the tools you're searching for as an institution? In that way, I think to keep yourself informed also of the development that we have been pushing for 20 years. People like Gunn-Britt and myself within the UN system, the Arctic Council system, and so forth, because much material is already there, and maybe it also is about creating some kind of a access point to reaching all of these good materials, because they can be hard to find sometimes. But my only advice, or my most important advice, would be to really think about this as an institutionalization that needs to happen, but on the basis of recognized principles and human rights, and take that approach into creating your system so that it upholds those human rights.
Hannah would like to add something to that, no? No? Good? Yeah. We have some question here.
Yeah, hi, Kerim Hesnes Nisanjolo from the University of Bergen, and also ILU Science and Art in Ilulissat. I have a question, because one of the things here is a challenge for our scientists, including myself, doing all the mistakes working in Kalaallit Nunaat or Greenland and working in indigenous communities, that we're not trained to work in these communities, right? And it's been mentioned here. So the question to you is, how do we reorganize our academic institutions, our universities, to make sure that our young ones are educated to be able to operate in this and make a healthy relationship to these communities?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can. The first thing that comes to mind is a general rule to everyone, and that's act like a human. That's always a good way to start. But the second is. So I again distracted myself by making jokes first. But no, yeah. Let's the other ask. I have to get back. Still a good advice.
I think it's very important to include also the Indigenous youth into these programs, so that we have insider voices there who are the ones, and then also do collaborations where you are actually, if you're, for example, as me, collecting data from a special context, then I try to already educate and work with the people who are in that context, so that I can, through, for example, action research projects with teachers, with people who are teaching language or something else, that we are actually working together with them, and they are bringing their data, and they are then telling us what they want to do with that data. So it's important that there are insiders doing some of that work.
I think we're reaching towards the end of our...
Can I do a quick, now I remember the answer. Just that there are youth science organizations like Emerging Leaders or those. I think that is a good training venue, and also I assume that based on all the protocols we have produced, it can be courses also in the universities. Thank you.
And we have the last question will be before we move on.
It's controlled from there.
Okay, yes, it is on. Hi, I'm Brett Simpson. I'm a freelance climate and human rights journalist. I live here in town, and I'm actually curious about where that knowledge often ends up in the media. Like, there's a record number of journalists here, and there's so many parallel conversations, I think, happening in media about tokenization, representation, this illusion of objectivity where somehow what's neutral, who can cover what issue is the neutral perspective is a certain type of person and anything else is biased. And just, I'm curious about, guidelines or even reactions that you might have of increasing interest from media in these issues and kind of who's treated as an expert in what way, or not Indigenous voices not being a monolith, these complexities, and kind of how this knowledge systems, this co-creation that you're talking about, kind of then echoes out through society in the way that it's covered or creates headlines.
Big question, and please answer briefly.
Well, tell me about it. Being from Galasna, Greenland, it looks like much of the media actually thinks Greenland can be sold. So, yes, very important. And I think media, we could almost have had this discussion, about media. So I would say everything I have replied here, I would also like to see that happening with media. So that would be my reply.
That was also exactly my gut feeling, that everything that applies to scientists and to some great extent also applies to journalists, to think of who are the experts and who is defining that. And also there are, like as a journalist, there are also indigenous media houses that you could link with to maybe have more working with them, but I guess they are overloaded too. But it's always, I guess, well, I am not a media person, but I guess journalists have training in seeing things from different sides. So try to see it from an indigenous person's shoes and try to find someone to represent that voice.
Thank you. And by this, we will conclude this part of the session. So, thank you to Hanna, Marit, Sara, and Gunbritt. Let's see, we will move, there. And please, Rune and Jørgen, if you're able to find your way to the floor. It's not the easiest task that we have given you, listening to this brilliant discussion and our brilliant panelists. But I'm really happy to have you here, Rune Vista, who's chair of the board of Nordforsk, and Jørgen Berge, who is my boss, deputy president.
Be kind.
Pro-rector of UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. And the challenge that we gave you was to comment upon what is said already in this, and because some of the challenges have been quite direct towards the thing that you do. So, Rune, as the Nordforsk guy here, would you like to start?
Yes, okay, thank you very much. I think it was extremely interesting to listen to this conversation, and I think it demonstrates that we really need to uphold the focus that we know and the land now have on indigenous knowledge and systems and perspectives, and that we, and we are striving to really have co-creation, meaning that we involve indigenous perspectives and knowledge from the start, from the design phase, through the development phase and the implementation phase. So we are not looking to fund tokens in that respect. And it was a very rich conversation with a lot of different things that were brought up. Obviously, it's very difficult to comment upon everything, but I saw or heard that Sara, she was mentioning this protocol for ethical and equitable science that has been developed, and we have looked at that, and because we are also starting a job to develop some guidelines of our own. Well, it's not our own, it's the Nordic guidelines for involving indigenous perspectives in research. And there has been a working group that was set down last year that is working on that currently. I have really high expectations to those guidelines. And I also noted this on the review process that I really hadn't thought about, that should obviously be part of those guidelines. So a lot of different things to take on further for me here. Yes.
Could I ask you a question then?
Yeah.
I mean, the process that Nordforsk has been through with this, and it's, as we talked about, it's innovative, and you could argue that it took some time, but that it's still, you're at the forefront in the Nordic context of doing what you do. So what kind of advice or what kind of insight would you give to your fellow funders of research in the Nordic context? Is it possible to draw something out of this already, or is it too soon?
We are actually going to revise our strategy this year, so this will be on the table. And it's, Nordforsk is it's a strange animal, sort of, in the Nordic context, because there are several, organizations under the Nordic Council of Ministers, but Nordforsk is the only one that has its own board. And the board consists of representatives from funding agencies in the Nordic countries. So in that respect, we are a bit different, and we are obviously also, to some extent, a product of those councils. And it was also said, I don't remember by whom of you, that there are differences in the Nordic countries. So obviously, this will be discussed, and we will need to find some common ground. I think it will be very useful to have these guidelines that are developed without us. It's the Sami Council is there, the Greenland Research Agency. I think that's the only research agency that is involved. There are ICC and Nordic academic institutions. So these guidelines, they will be sort of developed without the big funders, at least. And I think that will be an excellent point of departure for our discussion on it.
Yeah, thank you. And then moving to you, Jørgen, what did you note from this conversation so far?
Quite a lot. There was a question, why haven't we...
What took you so long?
Yeah, what took you so long? And it's a very good question. I think the only answer to that is that we are talking about culture. And you don't change that overnight. Of course, I'm a white, male, middle-aged man from central Oslo, so I'm probably not the first in line to talk about how to solve this. But I think it's about awakening, and it's about understanding the issues. And at the core of this, I think it is about respect and honesty. It's the respect that need to be in place for each other. Your story, Sarah, about your experience with the reindeers, I think that was a very beautiful story. Maybe not beautiful, it was yeah. Yes, thank you. But again, it's about the respect and honesty, and to bring in a different, honest perspective into this is that I'm a biologist. I work with the climate-related issues. We, as a species, Homo sapiens, we have not experienced the kind of changes that we must expect in the coming century. Indigenous people or Westerners, we do not have that experience. And that is one of the key challenges that face us. And also you talk about differences. I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make is to sort of put everyone into one sack, talk about indigenous and Western science. The need and the challenges in different parts of the Arctic is so huge that we need to look at the more specific regions and areas in our part of the Arctic, the climate change, that what we can expect is at least 4 to 5 times bigger change in terms of temperature than the global average in the coming century. And if you look at the nature and the environment that we live in and the culture that is so deeply embedded within that environment, the environment will change to such a degree that it's sort of outside the box of what any culture can be expected to understand and encompass. And if you go to the other side, sort of North America, the climate change there is not as big and fast as it is here. But still, but then again, there are other kinds of needs in terms of investment in infrastructure, for instance, in the local communities, that probably take more focus and create more need there than what we have here. So, and I was also in one of the presentations. We very often we end up talking about nature conservation, natural parks, and so on. But that in itself is an anachronism, because the environment is likely to change so much that we can't preserve what we have and what we have had for the last few thousand years.
So in what comes next then for the research and how to set about and fund and also for UIT to own and host research projects, how, for instance, in the matter of climate change in the Arctic, how would you go about to ensure that some of these aspects that we have talked of on Indigenous involvement are put into action?
I don't think I can answer that very quickly, but again, I think it is about acknowledgement, it's about respect and honesty. And again, coming back to the story about the reindeer, we have to realize and see that there are different ways of understanding issues and problems, and we are mutually dependent on each other. So that respect and understanding, I think that's the only way we can sort of really move forward in a proper and honest way. Unless you are sort of talking about sort of the very small the things we can do when it comes to involvement in project and so on, but I think it's deeper than that.
Yeah. Rune, comment.
I want to. Well, I was actually expected that this question of why it took you so long would actually come to me, not to you. But anyways, I think you answered it very well, and perhaps you answered it best, because it's obviously, you know, when we fund projects and have calls, there is something behind. You know, we get funding, for example, in Norway from 14 different ministries, all with an allocation letter with some requirements, and then that is sort of the starting point. So, but obviously this is about culture and understanding that this knowledge needs to be mainstreamed into research. It's nothing, it's not exotic knowledge that is, you know, that we should take on board because it's politically sensitive area. So it's actually knowledge that is relevant, and I think that's sort of the changing culture that we need to have. And you know, by sort of developing these guidelines that we are doing now, by financing networks that we have done in Nordforsk, to have, I think at least in Nordforsk there has been a change in culture, and I think Nordforsk is perhaps moving a bit faster than sort of the agency that sits in the board of Nordforsk, and hopefully they will actually come after Nordforsk. From the funding side, obviously it's to require co-creation, require involvement, and that should be sort of in the calls, obviously. And then there was a point that people actually need to read the calls. before the very last, before the deadline. And that is also a change of culture that needs to happen, perhaps more at the university level and etc. in the academic world. So I think we are actually moving in the right direction. I think it's very good that we have Nordforsk, that we can move perhaps a bit faster than the mother agencies, because I think all of us really are now sort of, because we have the board that we are discussing with, we also have the Nordhorks that are sort of closely associated. They give advice to the board, and that is the head of the research councils. They meet just before at least once a year, twice a year, before the board meetings, and then we have a common meeting. And obviously if we can sort of influence the Nordhorks, they will put funding on the table. So it's a good dynamic that we have, and I think the culture is changing for most of the countries. Some countries are a bit slower than others, but I think we are getting there.
Yeah. And finally, the issue of training and recruitment and the new generation of scholars. I mean, we had a question about it from the audience also. How can we work, and how do you see that the university system, but also the funding agencies, how can we work to include some of what we have talked of in the new generation of scholars? Jürgen, do you see something that we could do at UiT and other universities?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can do, and what we also will do, is to make sure that we include these perspectives into our teaching, not only teaching topics, subjects that are directly relevant for indigenous questions, but in all kind of education, in all topics, to make these such issues and perspectives and questions brought in, because they are relevant in almost everything we do. And I think that inclusiveness is a key solution to bring this forward.
Yeah, thank you. And Rune, how do you see this from your perspective?
Hopefully, when we create a demand, there will be some response to that demand. It will obviously take some time, but demand is obviously here now because you are overstretched, indigenous scientists. But of course, it helps to fund networks, etc. The small things that we can do, but obviously the big job, I think that would be more at the university side.
Yeah. And I'll answer my own question also to say that indigenous involvement and engagement should be concepts taught in PhD education. I'll just give you that one. Let's also then open for some questions from the audience to Rune and Jørgen as well.
Hi, sorry. My name is Tuva, and I'm from a master's student from Umeå University. And I'm just wondering, because you're speaking about the culture change and things like that, but I'm wondering, what are you doing, like, practically to shift? Because it seems like indigenous knowledge within these kind of applications are reviewed through a Western structure. What practically are you doing to make sure that other knowledge systems are treated as more equal within the structures of like review and things for these applications?
Very short from our side, practically the guidelines that I mentioned, it will be more than just guidelines. It will be guidelines obviously, but we need to implement the guidelines if they should have any value at all. What we do in the calls is something that is practical when we have calls, and it took some time, because I see from my notes that for example in 2014 we had a major Arctic research call. and indigenous knowledge wasn't, or peoples weren't mentioned at all. And then in 2016, things started to happen, and now it's more sort of mainstreamed into our funding. So, of course, it takes time, this culture change, also for us, but the change is there.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I said the respect and honesty is the two key points here, and the honest answer is obviously way too little. These are perspectives that need to be included in a much better way in the future.
Okay, we had a question over here. If we can have a mic.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask another question. How do you do cooperation and dialogue with other research institutes with these same kinds of issues? Because of course there's a kind of a responsibility of yours as well to spread the knowledge. And I'm asking this because now in Finland, the Strategic Research Council, the Academy of Finland, had a call out for the first round of the call, and it also involving indigenous knowledge and indigenous people, but it also didn't have any kind of support to the indigenous communities or the researchers of how this kind of interaction should be done, which is of course overwhelming. So what do you do in relation to discussing with other funding bodies? Thank you.
Yeah, if we look at, for example, international cooperation outside the Nordic countries, we do that as well. We have now recently had a call together with the Canadian research agencies on sustainable development in the Arctic, which actually, they are more advanced than us. I think the US was also invited into that call. For some reason, they couldn't attend. So perhaps at the time being, we do not have that much to learn from them, but obviously from the Canadian side, a lot. And this is, again, bringing about culture change in the Nordic financing institutions. So that is at least one thing that I would like to point to.
Yeah. And Jørgen, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think this event here is part of that answer, to be conscientious about bringing these questions on the table and raise them in a honest and public way. My university, we try to take this responsibility quite seriously. We are the Arctic University of Norway. We have an ambition to include indigenous perspectives into, as I said, all the teaching that we do. I think also, I dare to say, into the research that we do. Of course, that's probably a much longer and more difficult pathway, but that we take the opportunities that we have to bring the issues to the table. I think that is the most important thing that we do.
Thank you. And I think by this we will end our entire session. And thank you so much to Rune and to Jørgen for this. Please give them a hand. And then also I'll just thank you to Nordforsk for facilitating this session. And you should look up the faces that the people that you have here if you have some questions for them later on. So have a good Arctic Frontiers and a good stay in Tromsø. Thank you.